Good morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. It's Wednesday, December 18th, 2019. In this episode, I hope to answer what I think is a pretty important question. That is, what the heck is going on in Virginia? Almost everywhere I look, at least in my feeds and in people emailing me and contacting me, national or local media, mainstream press, even blogs, good guys, bad guys, all of them seem to be talking at least a little bit about Second Amendment sanctuaries in the Commonwealth of Virginia. There are literally dozens and dozens of these. Now, I've covered Second Amendment sanctuary cities many times, both on this show and then on our website and in speeches over a number of years. I've ramped that up recently because we've seen so many efforts in states around the country. But I started actually pushing gun rights owners in this direction in a speech back in 2009, maybe it was 2010, at the 25th Annual Gun Rights Policy Conference, calling for them to refuse to participate in the enforcement of at least federal gun controls on a state or a local level. Now, today I want to focus primarily and almost solely on Virginia. And here's a hint. It is far more rhetoric, far more political grandstanding than actual sanctuary. Now, first of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. We have a number of channels, both video and audio. We do our live stream video only, that is through YouTube, Facebook, DLive, Twitch, and Periscope. Plus, we have archived versions at brighteon.com, bitshoot.com, and BitTubers. We also have audio-only podcast edition, that's iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and elsewhere. Find all of our archives, all of the show notes. I'm going to have a lot of links that I'm going to reference in this episode that you'll be able to find. We publish them generally a half hour to an hour or so after the live broadcast is done. But for those of you who are listening on the podcast edition, for example, you just go to our website, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. That's where you're going to find all of the archives, all of the channels. Like if you don't like one of the channels that you're on, let's say you hate Facebook like I do, but we still use it all the time, and you want to try a different channel, there are other platforms that you can check this out on. Now, before getting to the meat of this, I just want to say hello to everyone joining me over in the live chat. There's Essential Freedom, Heather Rossi, Dan Warsaw, Too Tall, Michael Shane, MRGF, EHP Training, Kristen over on Periscope. Cool to see you over there. We don't get a lot of people commenting on our Periscope stream, but I really appreciate you joining me. Not that I don't appreciate everyone else, but that's pretty cool. Dan Reed, Meat Guns Funny, Yo Mama, David Michael, and everyone else. If I missed you, I apologize. Just so you know, all of the comments, whether it's live or in the archive, reviews on the podcast, smashing the like button, sharing the link, all of that stuff triggers the platform's algorithms. They're very easily triggered, and it tells those platforms to show the program to more people. So if you want to help us get the word out without spending a dime, smash the like, comment, and share. I really appreciate that. Hi to Scott Mize, I apologize if I pronounced that wrong, over on YouTube as well. Now, first of all, getting right into this, I just want to remind everyone, especially if you haven't watched or listened to this episode, this other episode, not all sanctuaries are cut from the same cloth. I covered this in a lot of details, sanctuary missteps, on October 30th. I will put the link to that episode in the show notes. You can see it up on the screen if you are watching the video. So I covered that in a lot of detail. So I'm not going to get into the lot of basics of what actually makes a sanctuary city. I'm not going to do a real comparison here today between the Second Amendment sanctuaries and the immigration sanctuaries. There's a huge difference. And you'll find all of that information in that episode, plus this article that was, man, awesome for Ryan and Deist and everybody else over at the Mises Institute, who not only had me as one of their featured speakers for their annual supporters conference at the end of October, but then decided to run this article of mine, Second Amendment Sanctuaries, Rhetoric versus Reality. I sent it over to all the major gun rights organizations, all of them. No one even responded other than, of course, Gun Owners of America. Gunowners.org. They are awesome. Eric and everyone else over there have always been kind to me, very supportive. We've worked together to push in support of state and local legislation in the past, and they were kind enough to link to this on their op-ed page on their website as well. That was the first time it's ever happened for me, so I thought it was awesome, and I'd mention it again. I would like to say, and I'm not the type to really toot my own horn, but this is a really awesome article. It will give you the total overview of what's going on as a general approach on these so-called Second Amendment sanctuaries. And just a couple of highlights, or just this one highlight. Contrary to the rhetoric being spread in support of these efforts, virtually none of these jurisdictions have passed laws equivalent to even the most modest immigration sanctuary city policy. In fact, most of them aren't passing laws at all. They just aren't passing laws. So let's get into what's happening in Virginia. And I think that's a good kind of segue because none of them in Virginia are actually passing sanctuary laws. Let's start out here with the National Review, not my favorite publication, but this is a pretty good article from Robert Verbruggen. Great name. From Monday. And as of Monday, he said they are up to 93 jurisdictions, according to his spreadsheet that he's keeping a tally of. I did not verify every single one. I saw Essential Freedom post in the YouTube chat that I think it's about 100 now. So it's a lot. There are, we could say 80, 50, doesn't matter. There's a ton of these being passed. And at this point on Monday, Robert said this is covering roughly 40% of the population of Virginia by my quick spreadsheet tally. He considers it huge. But he goes on and he says some of these places have passed vague resolutions in support of the Constitution rather than the more aggressive language proposed by the Virginia Citizens Defense League. And I think VACDL does very good work. But on this, I am going to take issue with the idea that the language being passed here is aggressive. And I think Virginia Citizens Defense League claims that they have basically drafted about 30 of these so far, and the other ones are, according to at least Robert, are more vague. And I think they're all vague. First of all, a couple of things to point out. All of them being passed are resolutions. And a quick civics lesson. In almost every state, Kansas is one kind of an outlier on this. In almost every state, when a local jurisdiction passes a resolution, it is a non-binding political statement. Many times, there are tons of resolutions that pass on a state or a local level. A lot of them are grandstanding. They're an opportunity to state your position. They can be very good, both strategically and to establish a position. But they do not hold the force of law. They have no legal impact. Zero. None. Ever. They won't hold up in court. They will not direct any law enforcement or any government officials to do anything. They just don't have that. Now, in some places, you can use a resolution to effectuate something that has been passed by law, which is called an ordinance. But these are really what's passing in Virginia are resolutions that are statements of opinion. Let's look at the Virginia Citizens Defense League resolution. This is a model template, and I think there are some very good parts about it if we are focusing on passing resolutions and understanding a good strategy to use that. But a resolution that does not have the force of law is not creating a sanctuary, period. And again, I urge everyone to check out the episode that I mentioned that goes over this in more detail, and the article at the Mises Institute, Second Amendment Sanctuaries, Rhetoric versus Reality. So first of all, even at the National Review, he's saying, some of them are great, some of them are more vague, but he considers the resolution, the language proposed by Virginia Citizens Defense League to be aggressive. Aggressive, to me, sounds like they're calling for gun grabbers to be locked up and thrown in jail or physically blocked, but none of that type of stuff is happening. Not that I'm saying that that's a good strategy today. I don't think it is either. But we're still talking about just variances in a non-binding political statement. And I'm going to pull this up here if I can. And it goes over a number of things. In a resolution, there's generally a bunch of whereas clauses. And these establish the kind of the principles that you want to get out there. And then you follow that with now, therefore, be it resolved. Resolved means they're just taking a political position, making a statement. If it says now, therefore, be it ordained, that means they're passing an ordinance. And in this one, they have some statements like this that I think are pretty weak sauce. They say, whereas certain legislation that has or may be introduced in the Virginia General Assembly and certain legislation which has or may be introduced in the United States Congress could have the effect of infringing on the rights of law-abiding citizens to keep and bear arms, as guaranteed by the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and Article 1, Section 13 of the Constitution of Virginia. So they're basically, this is very milquetoast. They're basically, instead of saying there's a bunch of crap on the books that violate our natural right to keep and bear arms, they violate the Constitution of Virginia, they violate the Constitution of the United States and the Second Amendment to that Constitution. They're just saying there's stuff that may infringe. It's very, that you couldn't be more half-assed about this than that kind of language. It's totally milquetoast. It's my view that every single federal gun control law, rule, regulation, anything restricting the right to keep and bear arms is a violation of the Second Amendment. We can cover the National Firearms Act of 1934, the Gun Control Act of 1968, its amendments in 1986, the NICS system, the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988, the bump stock ban from the Trump administration of 2018, and on. Basically, all of it shouldn't exist. The ATF shouldn't exist. That's an aggressive statement. That's also a true statement if we're to believe that the Constitution is the law of the land. And I'm sure, and I looked briefly, but I don't have a lot of expertise on Virginia gun laws, but I went to the NRA, who I'm not a fan of, but they do good work as far as keeping track of what laws are on the books. And Virginia, as of today, doesn't look like the worst of the worst. I live in California, so I might be grading on a curve here, but there are gun laws on the books, and they have been there for a long time. So the notion that there may be some things that might infringe on the right to keep and bear arms is super weak sauce. This is not an aggressive statement. I mean, it could be good to use something like this, but to call it aggressive is absurd. They go on and they say, whereas the County Board of Supervisors wishes to express opposition to any law that would unconstitutionally restrict the rights of citizens of this county to keep and bear arms. It's kind of a 5 out of 10 at best. Of course, we know that because it's a resolution, it's really just the Board of Supervisors of that county expressing opposition. They are literally making a political statement, nothing more. They are not you can't create a sanctuary. I guess I'm kind of mumbling at this point. But no one is complaining about the San Francisco County of Refuge, City and County of Refuge Ordinance, which was passed in 1980. That's the Immigration Sanctuary Ordinance in San Francisco, because it uses flowery language that opposes federal immigration law. No one is complaining about San Francisco or 300 plus other sanctuary cities because they talk nicely about how they oppose federal immigration law. They complain about them because those jurisdictions, whether you agree that they are allowed to do this or not, have something on the books that prohibits the enforcement of some federal immigration laws, and it has a significant impact on it. Literally just talking about things does not have that kind of significant impact. Now, I don't want to also poo-poo the idea of passing a resolution. A resolution can be very good. For example, in Virginia, in 1798, James Madison, the so-called father of the Constitution, following up on his buddy Thomas Jefferson, the sitting vice president, introduced or drafted, and it was introduced by John Taylor of Caroline and others, the Virginia Resolutions of 1798, opposing the hated Alien and Sedition Acts of that year. And it called upon all of the states, each individually, to interpose to arrest the progress of the evil. That's how Madison put it. So it was the duty. The states, he said, were duty-bound to interpose. This is a non-binding resolution, and it was calling on others to rally to the flag. This is exactly what John Dickinson, the penman of the Revolution, in 1767 and 1768 advised for all the colonies to do in response to the hated Townshend Acts of that year. He said after they suspended the Parliament or the legislature, I guess it would be the legislature of the Colonial Assembly of New York with the New York Restraining Act, he said, look, at this point in time, we may not be able to stop Parliament from doing this, but at very least, we should pass non-binding resolutions telling the Crown that we oppose this activity. And from there, other people can rally to that cause, and we can build upon that with concrete steps in the future. And clearly, the penman of the Revolution was right because they built upon those with concrete steps in the future and seceded from the empire. So resolutions can be important. Dickinson signed his letter with a Latin phrase, Concordia res parve crescunt. It means small things grow great by concord. If I had my 10th Amendment Center membership card, I keep keeping my wallet in the other room here, but if I had it handy, I could show you on the membership card. For those of you, and I've seen a number of people who are members who have these cards, annual 5-year lifetime members who have these cards, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members is where you sign up, just in case you're really interested in that. But it's right on there. This is our motto. We know that small steps lead to greater ones. We can rally people to the cause. And that's what a resolution should be used for. They can be very important. In fact, at the beginning of our existence, the organization started in 2006, and by around 2007, 2008, we were reporting on non-binding 10th Amendment resolutions to kind of rally people to the cause. Now we rarely do that because there's so many concrete steps happening. But in a state like Virginia, a resolution is probably the best step right now to deal with what the people there want to deal with. The problem is when you call something it isn't, you create expectations in the population at large for something to happen that will never happen based on what's being passed. Short version of that, everyone's hearing that there's Second Amendment sanctuaries in 90, 100 places in Virginia being passed. And then when it gets down to it and they pass the gun control measures, which they're probably going to do, I can't see any reason why they won't, pass additional restrictions on their natural right to keep and bear arms, which under the Virginia Constitution is a violation of the state constitution, probably in almost every situation as well. But once they do that, a lot of people are going to be thinking, well, we passed that Second Amendment sanctuary thing. We're good. No one's going to enforce that here. But there is no active prohibition on enforcement, and we'll talk about how this might play out in just a little bit. But back to this resolution, model resolution from the Virginia Citizens Defense League. They go on in the now therefore be it resolved section. So it's like 10 or 15 whereas clauses. Some of them are good. Some of them really focus on the incorporation doctrine and some Supreme Court stuff that I think is garbage. But the general overall view is that they support the right to keep and bear arms as a natural individual right. I'm fully on board with that, even if I disagree with some of the technical part of it. So I think as far as the whereas clauses, they can be pretty good, although I wouldn't call it aggressive. I guess I could be clear about that. I'm trying to be nice because I think these are good people at Virginia CDL. It's just that I would never advise someone to introduce this, to be honest with you. So anyways, now therefore be it resolved by the Board of County Supervisors in this county that, for example, the Board of Supervisors hereby expresses its intent that public funds of the county not be used to restrict the Second Amendment rights of the citizens of this county or to aid federal or state agencies in the restriction of said rights. First of all, a couple of issues here. One, the meat of the resolution, which is, if it was an ordinance, would be the directive to law enforcement to stop enforcing, like what they've done in San Francisco on immigration. They literally have something like this for immigration, but it follows by literally saying, you are not allowed to use funds for federal immigration enforcement. And that's why it works, whether you like it or not. On the other hand, here in Virginia, what they're saying is, we're expressing our intention that we don't want this to happen. It is not a directive. No one is going to stop using funds based on this. There is nothing that requires them to do so. Now, maybe someone will take this to the practical effect, and you'll get a whole county board of commissioners actually doing that, but I really doubt it. I've seen this type of thing happen for over a decade, and almost every time, nothing happens. So they're just saying, it's our intention that we don't want to use anything that restricts it. Now, if you take that coupled with this milquetoast statement that there may be some things on the books on the state and federal level that might restrict the right to keep and bear arms, then you really don't get a very positive gut feeling that anybody thinks that anything currently happening right now is a problem. And we'll get to how I think that's probably the issue here. So that's their intention. And of course, they say, we don't want these funds to be used to restrict the Second Amendment rights of the citizens of this county. I've got to have an aside here, and I mentioned this. I was on the Sherry Voluntary Show with Sherry and Daniel Blanchett last night talking about this briefly, but I have a serious issue with the notion of Second Amendment rights. There is no such thing as a Second Amendment right or a First Amendment right or a Fourth Amendment right or a 10th Amendment right. You have rights. Your rights don't come from a document. You do not have a permission slip to keep and bear arms that was ratified in 1791. I sent out an email, an article that I wrote on Sunday about Bill of Rights Day. This was the anniversary of the ratification, or the final state to ratify, Virginia, that is, the Bill of Rights, December 15th, 1791. And I pointed out in that article that this was kind of a thing. Like no one, or that this is really an issue here, because no one at the time, no one in the ratification debates, there's no record that I've been able to find. Maybe someone like Kevin Gutzman, who's really studied places like Virginia so closely, would know better than I, but I have never seen any founder, any ratification debate, any conversation referring to the natural right to keep and bear arms, which you have by your birthright, from your creator, from God, from nature, whatever you decide that it comes from. It's not from government or a piece of paper. No one referred to it as a Second Amendment right. The Second Amendment wasn't even ratified. They were debating it. And no one thought that you wouldn't have the right to keep and bear arms if they didn't ratify. This was literally just to put an additional restriction, really clarify that there was a restriction on government. So that is a serious problem. I hate that term. Maybe I'm spending too much time on it, but I think you guys understand where I'm coming from here. So they expressed their intent that no funds will be used. They don't actually ban those funds from being used, unlike what's being reported. And then they refer to Second Amendment rights. And they go on and they say, the County Board of Supervisors hereby declares its intent to oppose any infringement on the right of law-abiding citizens to keep and bear arms using such legal means as may be expedient, including, without limitation, court action. And my unfortunate frustration with many gun rights groups out there is that anytime you try to basically nullify a gun law or a gun regulation, they want to take the legislation and craft it in a way that will just set things up for a court case. They focus, and this is, if you're on the left, which I don't know how many of you out there are watching right now are, but maybe, if you're on the left, the ACLU is notorious on this for as well when it comes to surveillance issues. They have gotten better in recent years, but we've run into a lot of frustration with them as well, trying to get everything into the courts. Well, the courts aren't on our side, and if you talk about 20,000 regulations and laws on the books, there's no way for the courts to strike everything down. The people have to exercise their rights, whether the courts give them permission to or not. In 1774, Thomas Jefferson put it this way. He said, a free people claim their rights as derived from the laws of nature and not as a gift of their chief magistrate. So you have to actually just be responsible for your own rights, whether government says you can or not. So I think this is a very weak sauce, very milquetoast resolution. As far as a resolution goes, if they're just promoting it as a resolution, as non-binding, as a political statement, that could be very good. So let's go a little bit further. I'm barely getting into this. This is going to be a long episode. I probably will not be able to do Q&A or anything at the end. I was hoping to be able to do that, but, well. So over at National Review again, this guy, what was his name again? Robert Verbruggen said, as I noted in my previous piece, these resolutions have limited legal effect. Wrong. They have zero legal effect. Resolutions carry no effect of law, period. So at least he's on the right path there. He says, local governments are basically subordinate to state governments. Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one to go through. He says, but defiance like this can put political pressure on moderate Democrats, and failing that can force the state government to either A, and this is actually very good. This is the best part of his piece. This is one of the best things I've seen covering these so far. First of all, they have limited legal effect. I would just change that to zero. But they can put political pressure. That's what they're intended. That's what a resolution is there for, to create a rallying cause or a rallying cry, a political pressure on somebody. On moderate Democrats, he says they will either cause the state government to take drastic action to stamp out resistance, if there is any. I'm going to argue that there isn't going to really be much. Or B, give up and let these places refuse to enforce new gun laws. But none of them are actually doing that yet. They're just saying it's their intention. So where do we go from here? Are they going to refuse to enforce gun laws? I haven't seen anything that really says that other than bloggers and uninformed newspaper or media company reporters. Because we can look at the actual statements. If you dig in a little bit further and you collect a number of statements from people who have worked to pass these things, the people that are on the board of commissioners, the sheriffs, I don't find any indication that something is really going to happen. And we're going to cover things like the militia, National Guard, and things like that in just a moment as well. Here from the USA Today, we get Dana Schrad, the executive director of the Virginia Association of Chiefs of Police. He said the resolutions are, quote, meant to put political pressure on elected officials. At least the Police Chiefs Association, they're not thinking, and I know this is a county level thing, but they're not thinking that this type of resolution would actually stop enforcement of anything. That's one example. Next up, the Lee County Sheriff. This is Gary Parsons. This is what he told his constituents. Quote, I want to assure the citizens of Lee County that me and my officers will stand up to any federal or state agency that attempts to infringe upon our gun rights. I've got so many issues with that statement that I don't even know where to start. It's as if there has been, the position that Sheriff Parsons is taking is as if there has been no infringement on the right to keep and bear arms in the first place. And if he really thinks that, then how can we trust him to know what infringement on the right to keep and bear arms is going forward? I am okay with people drawing a line in the sand and saying no more. That doesn't mean that the current laws on the books are okay, but it establishes a foundation. It allows people to test out the strategies, and then people can learn in the general public that this works. But this guy's saying he's going to stand up to anything. But I don't know of any situation where Sheriff Gary Parsons has refused to assist in the enforcement of the National Firearms Act or the Gun Control Act or anything else in Virginia or in Washington, D.C. yet. So he was hammered on this, and in a follow-up, he said that his post, this is just political grandstanding nonsense because he just changed his statement. They just lie. They all lie. All politicians are liars. Start with that, and if every now and then you find one that isn't a liar, be thankful. But he lied, and then he changed his tune because he was hammered on this because it's nonsense. And he said the post was intended to make clear that his office would not take part in any effort to seize once legal guns that are later outlawed. So I don't trust that guy. But let's go back to Tazewell County. And Tazewell is, I think, the one that's getting the most media attention because they're talking about a militia. First of all, board member Charlie Stacy. He's an attorney. And this was drafted by 3 top attorneys, supposedly. Their resolution, which just passed, it looks like, just at the beginning of the month. He said, this board is blessed with 3 lawyers, and they designed a strategy to win in a court of law. This is one example of many that you can find out there. Basically, these resolutions are there to win in a court of law. They are not, you aren't creating a sanctuary if you're waiting for permission from a state or a federal court to tell you you have the right to keep and bear arms. That totally flies in the face of what Jefferson wrote in the Virginia Declaration of Rights. I think, no, it wasn't the Virginia Declaration of Rights. It was 1774 that he wrote it, but it was for Virginia, where he said a free people claim their rights as derived from the laws of nature. Maybe someone can put that in the live chat. So specifically, Tazewell and many other counties, you will find this doing some creative Google searches. You'll find that the people voting to pass them and the people drafting them are doing so with the notion that they're just going to sue. And he put it this way: the resolution is truly designed to allow us to hire lawyers to see that laws infringing on the Second Amendment never last any longer than it takes a court to remove them. And if he really meant that, we're talking, what is that, 84 years since the National Firearms Act of 1934? My math could be terrible. I went to a government school. So they're really just talking about going to court. They want to create some kind of standing so they can get in court. They're not really going to stop doing anything. They're going to wait till a court tells them it's okay to stop. And I don't think that bodes well, because I don't trust the courts in Virginia or the Supreme Court to actually hold up the Constitution of either the state, the Commonwealth, or the federal government. So he says the resolution is truly designed us to hire lawyers. That's really all they're talking about. And that actually, it comes pretty clear in every single one that I've looked at. Going on here. Oh, he actually said, let's take a look at this. He said, our position, and this is, I think a lot of people are listening to this and they're thinking, well, I heard about that militia thing. They're organizing an official militia. And when you get a standoff between the people, the body of people, which is the militia, everybody, and the government, the militia is going to win. So they passed 2 resolutions in Tazewell County. One of them authorized them to use funds to basically support a militia. And this is what they said. Young, this is a guy, this is the county administrator, one of the attorneys that actually drafted the the resolutions. He said, our position is that Article 1, Section 13 of the Constitution of Virginia reserves the right to order militia to the localities. Therefore, counties, not the state, determine what types of arms may be carried in their territory and by whom. So we are ordering the militia by making sure everyone can own a weapon. So it sounds good on its face. I like the idea of resurrecting constitutional militia. But are they really doing that? I'm going to get to that in just a moment here. So here from WVVA.com on December 9th, Tazewell County also passed a militia resolution, which gives us some teeth to be able to act and do something if a law comes out dealing with firearms that we see is illegal. That's what the sheriff of the county said. So he even believes that this militia resolution is going to give them the ability to basically call up the body of the people and arm them. So then you have to be basically, what they're saying is, in that situation, you're part of you're acting for the government in order to be able to keep and bear arms. And if it came down to it, that would be a very creative strategic move. Like, bring it on, dudes. We'll have everybody armed up. They'll all be deputized. I've seen that as well. I think that's very creative. It's taking the situation at hand and looking what you need to do to make sure that people can continue to exercise their right to at least some degree as much as possible. I think it could be very good. But the problem is they're really not doing that. All of the reports I've seen on this tell me that Tazewell County is forming a militia. The militia is happening. They're funding a militia, but it's not. First of all, this is what Tazewell County Commissioner Stacy said once again. Right now, we're all just hoping that the public outpouring all across the Commonwealth is enough to maybe inform the General Assembly that on these particular issues, their proposed legislation has gone too far. If you support the right to keep and bear arms, you support the Constitution of Virginia, you support the Second Amendment to the Constitution for the United States, this couldn't be a weaker statement. We are hoping that they don't do anything more. We're hoping that a lot of people get on board, and we'll just see on this particular issue that their proposals have gone too far. Well, too far is the first law that people have turned a blind eye to many, many decades ago. So this is weak sauce again. But going further, let's look at what's going on with the actual state constitution. Article 1, Section 13, they say that they can call up the militia. I'm going to read to you Article 1, Section 13 of the Constitution of Virginia. It says, a well-regulated militia composed of the body of people trained to arms is the proper, natural, and safe defense of a free state. Therefore, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That standing armies in time of peace should be avoided as dangerous to liberty, and that in all cases the military should be under strict subordination to and governed by the civil power. That has George Mason's hands all over it, I would guess. I don't know for sure. Someone probably knows better than I. But I don't see anything in Article 1, Section 13 that specifically says that this is up to the localities to call up the militia. This is an interesting legal argument. Maybe there's a court case on it, something like that. They could be right. They could be wrong. I just want to make sure people are aware that Article 1, Section 13, which is being cited for the county to call up the militia, doesn't actually specifically say that. They could be right, but I want to make sure you guys know that. Now, going on, here's Travis Hackworth. This is the chairman of the Tazewell County Board of Supervisors, which passed the resolution regarding the militia, calling up the militia, funding it. He says the resolution allocates funding from the county budget for the purpose of funding and maintaining a well-regulated militia. How are they going to do this? Well, Hackworth told News Channel 11 that funding from the budget would go to programs such as the Boy Scouts of America, the Girl Scouts, JROTC programs, and weapons training courses. Hackworth, again, chairman of the Board of Supervisors for Tazewell County, which is supposedly forming a militia, has clarified that the budget is going to Boy and Girl Scouts. They are not forming a militia. Maybe they will in the future, but it doesn't sound very positive to me. He said passing the resolution sends a message to Richmond that the rights of the individuals within the county will not be infringed upon. And again, repeating, Charles Stacy, the vice chair of that county board, which I keep citing, he said that they are just going to, if something violates the Second Amendment rights he uses, if they do that, then they were going to go to court. So this is, again, I don't know how else to go with that. Now, I've also heard that some people are saying that they're going to call in the National Guard to enforce things that aren't being enforced. First of all, we should make clear, again, and I think you've probably heard me say this a bunch of times, but I'm going to keep repeating it over and over and over. Under what's being passed, no one is refusing to enforce anything. No one is creating a militia. No one is banning enforcement of any state or any federal gun laws, period. They are saying maybe, and in fact, in almost every situation, and I know I focused heavily on Tazewell, but in almost every other county, they're literally setting the stage for a lawsuit. That is not a sanctuary. That is a lawsuit. Totally different strategy. Not saying that a lawsuit is always bad. I don't waste my time on them because most of them don't actually get good results. And relying on a court to give you permission to be free is not a good strategy for a free people either. But first of all, no one is actually stopping enforcement as of now. They're going to have to pass something else in the future. And I think that's one of the problems, because basically a lot of the people who aren't looking at this closely or understanding, they're just hearing the rhetoric, they're reading the tweets, and they're hearing sanctuary passed in this place, militia not enforced, we won't use funds. But it's really just expressing an intent to not use funds. They've not banned the use of anything for anything. So a lot of people are going to be thinking like, okay, well, they passed that assault weapon. I'm putting assault weapons in quotes. We're good because our county is a sanctuary. And then they're going to hear, well, they're doing a lawsuit to try to stop it. And in the meantime, maybe we should pass something else. Or if the lawsuit doesn't go through, then we'll have to pass something else. And I think this is going to kill a lot of the strong momentum in support of the right to keep and bear arms that's happening in the grassroots, because people are going to learn the hard way that what's being passed does nothing. So in response to a question about the National Guard, here's what Major General Timothy P. Williams, the Adjutant General of Virginia, had to say. We understand and respect the passion people feel for the U.S. Constitution and Second Amendment rights. This guy's awful, too. We will not speculate about the possible use of the Virginia National Guard. I encourage everyone to be patient while we allow our elected officials to work through the legislative process. We have not received any requests from the governor or anyone on his staff about serving in a law enforcement role related to any proposed legislation. As of now, of course, that's probably pretty obvious. That shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. But it doesn't sound positive. It sounds like if there was resistance, the National Guard, Williams and team would probably just follow orders, I'd assume. But it's going to take actual resistance to make that happen. And I don't think that type of conflict is actually coming based on what I'm seeing so far. Now, it's not just that, but here's one Virginia sheriff who I think, again, I think this is one of the most creative and potentially effective approaches. This is County Sheriff Scott Jenkins from Culpeper County. He says, I plan to properly screen and deputize thousands of our law-abiding citizens to protect their constitutional right to own firearms. They all use that phrase, constitutional right, Second Amendment right. That should be your number one indicator that the person that you're listening to doesn't really understand what they're talking about. So you can encourage them to do something positive, but be wary of trusting them because they're really not great on this stuff. So that would be a good creative way if it comes down to that they're not enforcing, which I don't expect to happen. I just only expect a lawsuit and at best a halfway victory. At best. But if it gets down to it, this could be a good approach. And maybe some other places will do this type of thing as well. Now, on the other hand, I've also seen recently that the Virginia legislature is probably, and this is where the political pressure part comes in, they're going to change their approach. I haven't read the legislation yet, but I heard already, or I read in the maybe Washington Examiner or the Times in the last week or so, that they're going to create a grandfather clause. And this, if you're a gun grabber, this is probably the most effective thing that you could do, is create a grandfather clause. Basically, if you own one of the weapons in question already, we're not coming after you. And we're only going to stop people from getting them new in the state. And this is playing the long game. And it's one of the best ways to reduce opposition, because many of the people who are concerned about this are concerned about government agents, goons, and thugs showing up at their door, the cops showing up at their door and taking their registered gun, which registration causes the problem in the first place. So how do you get a lot of that opposition out of the way? You don't come and get it. And then in 20, 30, 40 years, when those people have died off and no new people have been able to buy those firearms, then you have your total gun control in effect, no matter who's in power. This is a very, very smart strategy. It's very bad news if they take that approach, in my opinion. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I guess the bottom line is how I summed it up over at my article for Mises. Basically says, I'm talking about immigration sanctuary cities. They've drawn a growing ire from many conservatives and Republicans. But it's almost certain these self-styled Second Amendment sanctuaries won't get the same treatment from their ideological opponents unless they dramatically change their strategy and pass laws that actually do something. Anyways, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope you learned something. I'm going to link in the show notes to our Second Amendment Preservation Act. This is Second Amendment Preservation Ordinance, something that can be introduced primarily on the city and town level to concretely and effectively ban the use of resources, money, personnel, any logistics for the enforcement of all federal gun control measures. There's a lot of them on the books that need to be stopped. If you're in Virginia or elsewhere and you're concerned about state gun control measures, honestly, it's going to take massive civil disobedience. The relationship between a locality and the state in law and under the Constitution is different than a state to the federal government. The people of the states, the federal government is the creature. It's the thing that has been created, not the creator. And it's the other way around when it comes to states creating the localities. So opting out of enforcement of federal programs is very effective. On the state level, it's very difficult, and it really requires law enforcement, sheriffs, individuals, police saying, we're not going to enforce this. We're going to exercise our rights anyways. And then when the government comes in, the state government says, well, you have to. They have to do it in large numbers anyways. That's really the solution here. Not a lawsuit, not non-binding statements. It really, on the Virginia level and on the state level everywhere, it really is going to take massive, massive resistance. And that is more than tough talk. Anyways, again, I hope you enjoyed the show. It really gets me worked up, this particular issue, because it's so frustrating that I've been pushing for so many years. I've reached out to all these people, all the stakeholders in many of the states, and they just ignore us. I think a lot of the politicians really, really like this because it makes them look good for re-election. And that's what Daniel Blanchett, my friend, who's the producer for Sherry Voluntary's show, he was basically saying, he's like, I'm so cynical that I really think they know exactly what they're doing, and they're just taking a position so they can get reelected. Look, I'm on board. I'm opposing these guys because we didn't hear him talking about this just 6 months ago. So they had no problem with the gun laws on the books 6 months ago. They just don't want new ones, which I guess is a starting point. Anyways, I'm rambling. I'm grateful for you spending some time with me. If you support the show, smash the like button. If you want to pitch in financially, this is my cell here. 10thamendmentcenter.com/members, as little as $2 a month goes a long, long way. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day. I'll see you Friday here on the Path to Liberty.